Hey guys, welcome back to Crimson Shinobi. Today's fanfic is, if you enjoy it please like, subscribe, and support the channel for daily Naruto fanfics. Now, let's begin. The full moon shone solemnly down upon a lone stranger. Its heavenly radiance illuminated the park in which he found himself, slinging silver streams over his slim shoulders. The stranger was, for the most part, quite content to count all the stars in the sky, for they numbered his troubles on this evening. And what an evening it would prove to be. Physically, he was not much to look at, just a plain fellow in an even plainer suit, briefcase in one hand, phone in another, pressed to his right ear. On his way home from the office, no doubt. Nothing to see, nothing to take interest in. His progress was all but unimpeded by any and all passerby. No one took notice of another civilian on his way. Just the way he liked it. Simple though he might appear, were one to make the mistake of accosting this man on this night, they would find themselves little more than bloody chunks on the ground. Because this man was not a man. Indeed, were one to look closely at him, were their eyes to peel away the carefully coated layers of genjutsu, they would bear witness to a most curious sight. This was no mere mortal with dull eyes and brown hair, his eyes dark and clouded with the stress brought on by a long week's work. Were one to look at him, truly look at him, they would see bright blue eyes, whiskered cheeks and blonde hair. A grin as bedeviling as it was foxy in every sense of the word, his gait containing an almost sinister skip to it. No, he was speaking into the cell phone, his dulcet voice ringing merrily. "I'll be home late, Mia-chan. Ah, we've got new tenants. Interesting." A pause. "Nah, I'll make myself something when I get back, don't worry about it." Another pause, this one longer than the last as he listened to the woman's voice. "Come on, what are you worried about? It's not like I'm gonna kill anybody, unless they do something stupid." "But what are the chances of that, That's funny. I seem to recall you saying something about being reformed." Goo. If it was possible to experience dread through a phone, this man certainly felt it. Alright, just don't bring out the damn Hania. Sheesh. Ya nay. That smile, seemingly so bright and cheerful, abruptly collapsed in on itself the moment he snapped the phone shut. His gaze turned contemplative, realizing where his feet had carried him this evening. Here again. The park. Had it really been a year already? He could see the crater where he'd landed, glossed over now with moss and grass, a phenomenon dismissed by the citizens of this cruel city. With an almost imperceptible sigh, he dropped the henge. To the untrained eye his body seemed to shoot up like a sprout, blue eyes repacing brown, whiskers appearing where there had been none before, healthy tan complexion overwhelming the pasty white skin he'd worn only moments before. That loose blue suit fit him like a glove now, snug, yet comfortable. He was himself once more, no longer wrapped in layer upon layer of deceit and deception. It felt good to be back in his old body again. "Well, guess I'd better be going." The slightest prickling of dread plucked at his senses, something warning him to turn back. Did the air feel colder on a sudden? He didn't know. He hadn't tried to utilize his sixth sense for ages now. Whatever was lying in wait, it didn't seem to have bad intentions, but as he knew, appearances could be deceiving. "Maybe I should head back." Nah. Naruto scoffed at the idea of going home just yet, the night was still young. This city was still bustling with life, even if this park wasn't. Besides, he felt restless. Ordinarily he wasn't the sort to take leisurely evening strolls, but this was a special occasion. Today marked the anniversary of an ill-fated experiment, a jutsu that violated both the boundaries of space and time, a technique so powerful it had essentially ripped him from one time and flung him into another. It had not been without consequences however. Though he existed in this realm, he had utterly erased any trace of his existence in the other. He couldn't very well exist in the past and the present now, could he? Today was that anniversary of that death. "Don't play with that Kwani Naruto-kun," Iruka had once told him when he was a young boy. "You'll poke your eye out." Naruto hadn't listened and of course, he nearly poked his eye out. Be careful with that jutsu, Kakashi-sensei had said him when he was a little older. You'll end up injuring yourself. Only after he'd nearly scorched all of the chakra out of his arm with the Rasenshuriken that he'd taken heed of those words. Make sure you wear protection from now on, Jiraiya once admonished him shortly after he'd starting dating a certain Hyuga. Don't want any more kids running around after what happened in Demon Country, now, do we? Nearly 4 weeks after that discussion, Hinata discovered that she was pregnant. His early life had been full of such warnings and wisdom, most of which he hadn't heeded. Did Uzumaki Naruto regret any of them? Not one bit. By nearly gouging his eye out he'd learned to appreciate just how deadly a kunai could be. In ignoring Kakashi's advice, he'd learned to improve the Rasenshuriken until it was truly a work of art. And when he'd refused to accept Jiraiya's possibility of protection, he'd found himself the father of a bouncing, pale-eyed baby girl who would swiftly become the light of his life. Well, there had been that one jockstrap incident, but putting that aside. Looking back, he'd done a lot of things his teachers and probably his parents would have disapproved of. He'd learned to live life through trial and error, for him there had been no other way. It was simply how he'd had his fate handed to him, he was the sort to take action first and damn the consequences later. Some might call him stupid for that. Didn't matter. Things such as tact were wasted on him, yet left to his own devices he'd managed to learn a forbidden jutsu, create his own technique, master the power of the Kyuubi, and get flung forward several centuries in time. Now in his ardent defense, none had ever told Naruto not to play with seals. Or had they? He didn't remember. The incident had occurred nearly a year ago, so his memory still wasn't at its best. But, it had been that or death at the time, so he supposed he'd chosen wisely rather than losing his life. Some life. By the time he'd even thought to experiment with ways to seal away the supposedly immortal Madara, nearly everyone else was already dead. Tsunade, Sakura, Kakashi-sensei, his beloved daughter Hoshi and Hinata all long since consigned to their graves. Sasuke was still around of course, but even then there was only so much one Uzumaki and Uchiha even with their newfound powers could hope to do against the shinobi turned god. Needless to say, they'd been decimated. He'd flung himself into researching seals only after the fact. There had to be a way, he had thought. Maybe if he mixed one thing led to another and well, he'd swiftly come to the conclusion. This was not his home. Not his time. But what did that matter? Most of his friends and his family were long dead and gone, and in experimenting with that seal he'd denied the inane Uchiha the final piece he'd needed for his Moon's Eye plan. Really, he should have been proud of himself. There was just one problem. The last thing he'd expected was to be flung forward several centuries in time. And if this was the future, that meant Uchiha Madara's plan had failed. Someone had stopped him. Was it Sasuke? However unlikely though it might be, he hoped that was the case and often wondered about that. Perhaps his best friend had somehow managed to actually kill the madman sometime after he'd flung himself forward in time. But did it matter in the end who had ended him? He supposed not. If the world had been saved, did it really matter who was the savior? No, it didn't matter. Not to him, at least. Shinto Tito, the capital of Japan, was his home now for better or worse. The city hadn't always been called by that name, although, once, it had been known as the Land of Fire, and in this day and age Tokyo, but ever since MBI had come onto the scene as a major power in the corporate world nearly a year prior, its name had been changed. In this day and age, anything, even names, are easily interexchanged for the right price. And when a company as massive as MBI bought out just over 80% of the city, well, that was apparently more than enough to facilitate a name change. But though its name had changed hands countless times, the wayward shinobi took comfort in the knowledge that his current place of his residence would not be swayed so easily. Maison Izumo was his true home. Mia, one of the few people he could call both friend and enemy. Kami, that landlady, could be downright scary sometimes. She made Orochimaru look like Green Genin. It was no lie that he himself had become a great deal deadlier and unstable since gaining this power, but the moment he'd become one of her tenants he'd learned the hard way that his powers had limitations. Mia was strong, perhaps even stronger than him. Whatever the reason, she didn't approve of violence under her roof, and she was not above scaring the crap out of her tenants to enforce order. Yeah, scary indeed. In any case, he'd had nearly a year now to mourn what he'd lost, to readjust to this strange, wondrous world in which he found himself flung. It hadn't been easy, mind you, when you knew 1,000 ways to kill had possessed chakra of several biju trapped inside them. Living a normal life was, well, difficult, to say the least. He could count the number of times he'd lost control on his fingers and toes before he'd become a tenant of Maison Izumo. Aha, she'd been a lifesaver when it came to reining his impulsive urges in. Don't be like that, Nei-chan. We just wanna have a little fun. Until now. Naruto slowed his stride and raised his gaze, cerulean eyes coldly regarding the one who had just spoken. Or rather, several someones. His eyes took them in at a glance, his brain swiftly switching from calm civilian to a cold shinobi. In that instant, his emotions as he knew them simply ceased to be. He turned them off. It was just like flicking a switch, something he'd been able to do ever since finding himself in Shinto Tito. And one he used now, contemplating the sordid scene unfolding before him with a ruthless dispassion. 5 people, 4 male and 1 female. 3 yards out, unaware of his presence, standing semicircle around the girl, the latter sitting quietly upon a bench. Crowding her, touching her, intentions less than pleasant, crass, even. Hostile, scruffy, ruffians, robbers. No, the woman was barely clothed. Personal wealth unlikely. Only one answer, then. And that answer was unpleasant. Naruto's visage creased in a slight frown. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? Wah. One of them, Japanese, whirled at the sound of his voice. What the hell do you want? In the time it took for the rest to notice him, he'd already contemplated their deaths. Jugular, lungs, heart, skull, spine, stomach. So many ways to kill these imbeciles. Human bodies were oh so very fragile, it was almost enough to make his blood boil in its vein. In meandering around his old stomping grounds he'd sensed some form of ill intent but had been too lost in his own thoughts to realize it hadn't been directed at him. Their target was the girl. Now, just how to deal with whatever aggressors were lurking abouts. I think the lady would prefer it if you left her alone. Whomever the woman was, she didn't exactly strike him as the talkative type. She offered no voice or opinion, nay, she didn't even turn to glance at him. But the men surrounding her did, their lecherous stares turning to glares of open apprehension when they saw the well-built stranger staring them down. What's in the briefcase, Pops? One of them asked. Pops. A muscle jumped in Naruto's jaw. I'm only 25, thank you very much. Papers, pens. He replied amicably, refusing to let his anger show. There would be time for that later. Office supplies, that sort of thing. Then you won't mind if we just take that off your hands, then. Clearly they didn't believe him, because a knife flicked open in the man's hand. Come on now, hand it over. For a moment, Naruto actually considered the option, but only for a moment. Was it really worth getting riled up just for the sake of a single girl? A year ago, he would have said no. But now, at length he sighed and shook his head, the imperceptible motion sending his chin-length bangs sweeping from side to side. That's not a knife, kid, he muttered, reaching up to loosen his tie with a hand. This is a knife. What are you urk? Those words ended in a strangled grunt as a kunai flew forth from the blonde sleeve and slammed into his skull, embedding itself to the hilt. He was dead before he'd even hit the ground, lifeblood pooling fruitlessly at his feet, wasted so much like his life. The former shinobi said nothing, offered no words as the fool's corpse struck the ground. The muffled thud, being the only sound to indicate his passing. One of his comrades, if they could even be called such, roared in rage and drew a bead on him with his pistol, hands trembling with barely controlled rage. Bastard. For the Jinchuriki, it was like watching one of those in old movie reel, events unfolding panel by panel. He heard the thug squeeze the trigger, saw the bullet leave the chamber, stood by stoically as it crawling through the air towards him, moving as though it were mired in quicksand. There were any number of ways he could have dodged it, wreaked havoc upon the buffoon's body, and moved back into place before the shot so much as neared him. But that wouldn't have been any fun. Call it sadistic, but he liked it when his foes realized they were outmatched. It was one of the few pleasures he enjoyed in life. That and these goons had been about to rape a helpless woman for the sheer pleasure of it. For that they would suffer. Naruto's head snapped back from the sheer velocity behind the handgun, teeth locking down firmly against the shot that should have pierced clean through his jaw. A thin line of smoke snaked between his teeth, making those glowing red eyes all the more disconcerting, that shit-eating grin thrice as intimidating. FWHA, he lisped around the bullet, his mouth still curling into the mad rictus of a smile. S.ITH. Twisting his head aside, he spat the casing out onto the ground and chuckled. It was a deep, throaty sound. See, I just don't understand what's wrong with this generation. No skill, no talent whatsoever. Yet, when you put a pistol in their hands, they suddenly think they're the big man on campus. Stick them in a large enough group and they'll think they can do whatever they want and get away with it. Suddenly, his scarlet sight narrowed. They cannot. Wah! The blonde's briefcase, forgotten until this very moment, descended mercilessly. One strike, that was all it took, and the gunman's head simply ceased to exist. One moment it had been there. The next it vanished in a spray of red as the titanium case crushed his skull into a bloody mist. His partner didn't even have time to blink before the demonized blonde was upon him, twisting him around to drag a hand across his throat. Naruto flicked his hand and willed a touch of demonic chakra into his fingers, sharpening them into deadly claws as they passed by mankind's second most vulnerable area in a brutal swipe. The fool went down with a gurgle of surprise and blood, nothing more, nothing less. Next. Oh, shit. The last of them tried to scramble away, but to no avail. Naruto reached down, fingers clawing around his face in a brutal vice, hauling the larger man off his feet, then hoisting him into the air. Despite the inescapable hold the shinobi had on him, he still had the gall to speak, to struggle at the, "Come on, man. You can have the bitch. I'll give you whatever you want. Just let me live. Please, please." Already he could feel those fingers beginning to sear into his face, his skin beginning to bristle and crack as the moisture evaporated beneath. Had he the strength to move his eyes, he would have realized his body literally mummifying while he still drew breath. The burning only drove him into further panic, his legs thrashing feebly at the chest of his killer. Please, he was screaming now, wailing as those fingers burned into his flesh. Stop. Naruto wasn't listening. Let's burn him a little, Sun-kun. There was something to be said about the scent of burning flesh. It wasn't a smell you could forget. Yet Naruto did not relent, he charred the man until nothing but bones remained. Once finished, he did the same with the man's comrades, incinerating them until not even the bones lingered, reducing their bodies to bloody ash on the winds. It wasn't a fitting end for them, but it was one that removed any and all chance of him being linked to this crime, if it could even be called such. Obliterating scum such as these should be called a service to the public. Ah, the eternal shinobi turned, drawn from his dark musings by the voice of the woman on the bench. She was staring at him. Now, Uzumaki Naruto was no virgin. He wasn't afraid of a pair of tits, nor did he splutter at the sight of a half-woman. If anything, the sight of such a creature made him curious. Roused his attention. Surely, she wasn't out here of her own volition. No one wearing a bloody lab coat would be. Wait a second. Blood. Naruto frowned, peering at her matted brown tresses, at the strange crest covering her forehead. She met his gaze back a bit before lowering her own gaze, either unwilling, or unable to meet the fiery heat of his gaze. Ararara, he blinked slowly, willing his eyes to return to their true blue and failing when he realized how angry he truly was at the men who'd tried to have their way with her. He could still feel it coursing through his veins, the chakra of 9 different biju refusing to be quelled so easily. Grimacing, he pursed his lips into a thin line and fought to compose himself. "What are you doing out here so late, miss?" he asked kindly, regaining her attention. "You're going to catch cold. This is not a place for someone like you to be at night." Her glazed eyes passed over the slaughter before her, absorbing the grisly carnage without so much as a word. Finally, a single pair of syllables pushed between her lips. "Broken." Naruto cocked his head aside, baffled. "How? Broken? I'm broken," she repeated, her words little more than a frosty whisper. "I don't have anywhere to go home to." She tucked her head into her legs, burying it there in the silence. Something about those words stirred a side of him he hadn't known in a very long time. Unbidden, he was reminded of another, broken tool, during his early days as a shinobi. Haku. Why did this woman remind him of her? He couldn't quite put his finger on it, just as he couldn't explain what had made him react like that against the thugs and all but eviscerate them. He usually wasn't that violent unless provoked. And this woman was definitely provoking so meting other than white-hot rage in him. Well, that won't do now, will it? He wasn't quite sure what made him do what he did next, only that he reached down, placed 2 fingers beneath her chin, and pushed her gaze up to meet his. She stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting his own crimson. Unbidden, Naruto felt his heart skip a beat. What the hell am I doing? His face felt unusually hot, his mind suddenly awash with thoughts of the broken girl sitting here before him, looking up at him with such pain and loneliness that he felt his soul wrench. Who was she, to evoke such a reaction in him? "What's your name?" His voice sounded strangely out of breath to his ears. "Akatsu." Her face was likewise flushed, her breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. Ashi. Naruto blinked, baffled. Ashikabi. Before he could think to ask what she meant by that, the woman scooted closer and gently caged his lips with hers. They were like ice to the touch, though not necessarily unpleasant. Cool and cold, yes, but so terribly fragile, as though any action on his part would shatter her forever. A torrent of emotions not his own tore through him, loneliness, despair, and a longing so intense it made him tremble. Unbidden, his hand rose to cup her cheek and deepen the kiss, a trickle of his chakra worming from those fingers, flowing up into the mark upon her forehead. Well, a lot of things happened at once after that. First, the crest on her forehead pulsed blindingly bright, threatening to outright blind him all of an instant before it shattered. Ice blue wings spread wide across her back, a tiny mule of surprise leaping from her lips as they spread to encompass the length of her body, sending flakes of snow skittering about them both. Just as swiftly as it had begun, the light show ended, the icy feathers dissolving into her back with a silent sigh. Her thoughts bombarded him like a recenshuriken. Winged. Shouldn't be possible. Happened. Happiness. Joy. Ashikabi-sama. Found you. Finally found you. Naruto nearly recoiled, shaking his head for clarity. He could feel his chakra within her now, a veritable maelstrom of energy that hadn't been there before. What the hell was going on here? Part of him wanted nothing more than to sweep this girl back into his arms and kiss her breathless. He stubbornly fought off this new feeling until he could be certain it was his own. "Found you," she said, the faintest of pink hues burnished those pale cheeks, lingering for only an instant as she nuzzled her head into the crook of his neck. Ashikabi-sama. Despite himself, Naruto colored. Truly he had no idea what was going on here, what had even prompted him to kiss this woman. And yet now that he had, there were questions. So many questions, but first and foremost, just what are you? Sekirei. She answered, it seemed to be her way to speak like that. And just what is a hey? Abruptly Akatsu's eyes rolled back and she slumped, going limp in his arms, hence the reason for his exclamation. Oi! Naruto tsked softly as he caught her, the very beginnings of a frown marring his face. Oddly enough, that strange crest on her forehead was gone. Had he been of a mind to look, he might have realized that it had taken up residence upon her back. But he wasn't of that mind, rather, he was wondering where in the hell those wings had come, and what the devil was going on here. Instead, he was left to gawp at the former scrapped number in his arms, and wonder to himself. He did what? Benetsubasa's shrill shriek split the halls of the penthouse in twine, a sour note in everyone's ears. Loud, Haihane groaned in monotone, flopping onto a couch. You're noisy. Baka. That's not the point, she growled, chewing on her thumb in distress as she gazed at the screen. This is important. A scrapped number was just winged. He, scrapped number. Not as scrappy as you ga. Blood spurted out as a clawed hand poked into her own temple. I'm bleeding. The red Sekirei sweat dropped slightly, a silent testament to how many times this had happened. Then she remembered what she was supposed to be doing. Just who the hell is this guy? Who is who, now? The redhead froze, her spine turning to ice, cold fingers of dread plucking at the back of her brain. Dread, terror, fear, all these thoughts and more ricocheted around in her brain as she laid eyes upon number 4, a terrible dread draping itself over her in ghostly pallor. Number 4, the dog of MBI, the untamable Sekirei, Karasuba. This woman would kill her without so much a second thought if she looked at her the wrong way, let alone spoke out against her. Gasping, the poor girl wheeled away from her superior and desperately thrust a finger at the large monitor. "See for yourself, Karasuba-senpai." The silver-haired Sekirei, also known as Black, to her comrades, cocked her head aside and frowned, peering at the monitor with a frightening level of passion. Data scrolled past her vision, identifying the perpetrator as one Uzumaki Naruto, famous novelist and recent college graduate. Author of the Ika Ika series. Suspected of a dozen murders in the past 12 months. All charges acquitted. 6 feet tall. Well built. Nothing less than 190 pounds of sheer muscle. Such facts didn't concern her, save perhaps the last rather. The flash of crimson caught her eye. She watched, enraptured, as he filleted the 4 fools with ease, before impossibly winging that scrapped number. A small shudder racked her body, though not necessarily a bad one. Now, it could be said that Karasuba wasn't the curious sort. She rarely took interest in anything beyond what MBI ordered her to do. Even then, she didn't necessarily enjoy it. All her opponents were so weak, their blood was barely worth staining her blade. But this, when was this recorded? She inquired, her deceptive smile only slightly masking the killer intent behind it. Just a few hours ago. Benetsubasa all but skittered away from the more powerful Sekirei, hurriedly averting her gaze once she realized the older woman was more interested in the monitor than her. Thank Kami. There was a good reason after all, that no one had dared to wing the so-called Black Sekirei. Not even Natsuo. Approaching her was akin to a rabbit sticking its head in the lion's mouth and kindly asking the lion not to bite down. But this man wasn't a helpless rabbit, he likely wasn't even human. Humans didn't have reflexes like that. Humans couldn't burn bodies with just a snap of their fingers. Just like that, she knew. This man was a hunter. A killer. Just like her, cold and ruthless to the bone. An equal. Interesting. Perhaps he might even be the one she'd been searching for. Uzumaki Naruto, unbidden, her tongue flitted its way between her lips. I'll have to pay him a little visit. Achoo. Naruto sniffed harshly, scrubbing at his nose with the back of a hand. Odd, was someone talking about him? He hoped it was anything bad. Otherwise he'd have to hunt them down and kill them. He could still feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his chakra so recently released, almost unwilling to go back into the cage that was his body. It wasn't easy having the chakra of 9 Biju trapped in your body, because that was exactly what this was, pure chakra, with no mind but his own to govern over it. Hey, they had it coming. The eternal shinobi grumbled softly to himself, choosing to ignore both that opinion and the voice in his head. Ashura, as if he hadn't had enough voice beforehand. Having the son of the Rakudo Sennin in his head was a small if annoying price to pay for the power of the 9 Biju made manifest in him. Besides, most of the time he had the right of things. He wasn't the sort to quail at violence, though he did often champion that most people could understand each other. He'd seen enough of this world in the last year to disagree. Whatever peace had been achieved in the past, it obviously hadn't transitioned into the future. The little killing spree back in the park was a prime example of that. Just the thought of them was enough to make his features tighten in rage. He wouldn't have been able to talk those fools down from their crass ambitions. Scaring them off wouldn't have sufficed, either. They'd simply try take advantage of the next girl they happened upon. No, the only way to be certain with scum like that was to make certain they couldn't do it again. Gah, I'm so gonna get bitched at for this, he swore silently. Using my powers in public like that. Still nestled securely in his arms, Akatsu stirred ever so slightly in her sleep at those words, her hooded eyes fluttering open for but a moment. In that instant Naruto was suddenly struck by her beauty, despite the fact that she was only wearing a bloodied lab coat. He'd never seen a more perfect sight in his life. Whoa there. Where had that thought come from? Ashikaba-sama, where? It's all right. His first instinct was to comfort her, and he seized upon that. I'm taking you somewhere safe. No one will be able to hurt you again. The snow woman flushed lightly. Oh, K. And, just like that, she was under again. Unbidden, the former shinobi and infamous author felt his cheeks color. Just who was this girl to stir these old feelings in him? He'd long since considered himself empty hollow since Hinata and Hoshi's deaths. Playing it off as nothing was one of the only ways he could bring himself to cope short of killing something. And yet this girl, this woman whom he'd only just met, already had his heart racing. What the hell is a sekirei? More importantly, what's an ashikabi? These thoughts hung heavy over his mind as he half walked half trudged his way up the path to Maison Izumo. Despite his mental weariness, he'd never felt more alive. A silent thrill coursed through him as he recalled the deaths of those 4 thugs. But it was never enough, was it? The door swung open just before he could grasp the handle, revealing a heart-shaped face from which ruby eyes shone, and hair the perfect shade of lavender tied neatly with a pure white ribbon. She was wearing the traditional attire of a miko that consisted out of a purple hakama, a white haori with a sash-like belt and wooden sandals. Mia. As always, he was struck by her beauty. Even after spending nearly a year under her roof, he still had difficulty believing someone could be so beautiful. She made the kunoichi of his age look like little girls by comparison. Oh my! She gasped, a hand flying to her full lips to mask her own shock. Whatever happened to you? You're covered in blood, Naruto-kun. Are you hurt? Ah. The blonde blinked, just now realizing the fact that he was still coated with the red of his victims. It's not mine, Mia-chan, I just ran into some trouble in the park. His regeneration did miracles for the flesh, but it couldn't do a damn thing for the sordid state of his clothes, nor the fact that they'd been savaged from shirt to sternum. The poor outfit had been badly torn from his rapid movements. Fabric in this day and age simply wasn't up to his body's standards. And this is, oh, Naruto blinked, remember the woman he was holding. This is Akatsu. She's the reason I'm covered in blood. In hindsight, probably not the best choice of words. The lavenderette concealed a smile behind her sleeve as she saw Akatsu bundled up in his arms. Don't tell me you finally gave into those beastly urges and took advantage of this poor girl, Naruto-kun. An aura of subtle malice seemed to creep and crawl over the edges of her slight form, a masked creature wriggling its way out behind the woman's slight frame. Hania. Up close the thing didn't terrify so much as it did unnerve any unlucky soul who laid eyes on it. enough to make them capitulate in even the most disagreeable matters. Oi oi, there's no need to it. Naruto sighed aggressively, a puff of air sneaking between his clenched teeth. For some reason, he really wasn't in the mood to put up the act right now. He didn't know whether it was the bond he'd formed with Akatsu or not, but whatever the case, he just wanted to get the young woman inside and out of harm's way as soon as possible. First of all, Mia, put that damn thing away. You know it doesn't do anything to me. Secondly, did you just accuse me of rape? Think carefully about your answer. He finished his sentence with a smile of his own, and a devilish creature bearing 10 tails seemingly whispered into existence beyond his shoulder, its lone eye swirling madly in response to her Hania. It would be such a shame if we came to blows over a simple misunderstanding, wouldn't you agree? Sparks skittered their way between those gazes, Demon and Hania leering at each other over their counterparts' backs. Star, you're going to be stubborn about this, aren't you? Just like that, the Hania was gone, as though it had never been. Would you have it any other way? Naruto smiled, shackling his own killing intent with a snicker. Honestly, Mia might worry him at the worst of times, but even then she was nothing compared to Uchiha Madara. That was capable of crushing the Gokage and of destroying entire mountains with a single swing of his sword. Compared to that, the landlady wasn't scary at all. Oh, he might act like it at times, but the act was really more her benefit than anything else. They both knew that were they ever to go at it for real, half the capital would be destroyed. See that you don't trek blood into my house. It might have been the fact that he'd let a bit of his own killer intent leak out, but the landlady didn't challenge him any further than that. Naruto chuckled, almost tempted to give her a kiss on the cheek in passing as he often did when leaving the inn, but he somehow doubted that was a very good idea right now. Mia just might try to cut him up if he sassed her any further, and as appealing as the idea of a spar normally was, he really wasn't in the mood for a workout right now. Hi. He chortled lightly, stepping inside, shrugging the jacket off onto a nearby hook. He didn't even have to release his hold on Akatsu in the slightest. The poor garment was so badly shorn that it all but slipped from his shoulders the moment it was free. Naruto frowned at the battered jacket, then seemed to think better of it. Taking one arm away from Akatsu, he raised his hand into a seal and muttered under his breath. Just as a certain blonde bomber was often wont to do, only with less of a boom. Katsu. The battered jacket immediately imploded in on itself as the tiny explosive tags woven into its stitching chose that moment to activate, rendering the garment no more than dust on the wind. He'd have to dispose of the rest of his clothes later just to be safe. With that, and the incapacitated Akatsu in mind, he discreetly created a shadow clone and handed the prone woman over to it, sending both off to his room. It was times such as these that he was immensely grateful that Mia knew of his abilities, as did Kagaki-san and Uzuma-chan, otherwise he'd have some serious explaining to do. And if this new tenant saw anything, well, it would be such a shame if she were to mysteriously disappear now, wouldn't it? Cuckoo. Honestly, he scared himself sometimes. With that task completed, he waited a handful of seconds before making a beeline for his room. Rather, he tried. Scarce had he rounded the corner than he nearly ran smack dab into those very tenants, a pair of bodies roughly jarring him from the side, jostling him and nearly causing him to stumble altogether. Gomen, sumimasen. Oi, watch where you're. This was a new face. The newcomer was surprisingly slight in his stature, slim while lacking any real sort of muscle. Dark eyes, and darker hair, with a round sort of face that didn't look very reliable. Frail, hesitant, not a fighter, not even a man, just a boy, really. Probably a prospective college student, or something. A year and a half ago, Naruto would have tried to befriend this boy. Encourage him perhaps, maybe inspire some confidence in him. But after all he'd seen and done in the last 365 days, he couldn't quite keep his lip from curling in disdain at the thought. He wanted nothing to do with this person. Weak. He didn't even need to enter sage mode to know that. The girl woman, on the other hand, was another matter entirely. It took everything he had to keep his jaw from dropping at her, this beauty wrapped in that scarlet kimono. And did he mention the rack? They were even bigger than Hinata's. He promptly smacked himself for thinking such things. May his wife and child forever rest in peace, but still, it was difficult not to gawp at this young woman standing here before him. Hardly anyone in this day and age had a body like that anymore, and one of them lived here at Mizuno. Were these two related, somehow? Pardon me, but could you please not stare at her? Oh ho, so the boy had a spine after all. Give the poor kid a break. You're scaring him. My bad. Naruto apologized to Asura as much at him, but to the latter it came across as more of a scowl. You guys the new tenants? Why yes, I'm Sahashi Minato. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the blonde's blood-stained clothes. I is that, and who might you be? The eternal shinobi deflected, turning his attention to Minato's girl. From the way she seemed to be sticking by his side, he could only assume as much. She certainly didn't share enough of any resemblance with him to be a sibling. I'm number 88, Musubi, the young woman chirruped in reply. I'm a fist-type Sekirei MMPH. Musubi-chan, confidentiality. The blackette hissed. The girl giggled and stuck out her tongue in embarrassment. Sorry, Minato-san. Naruto frowned. Sekirei. Too many questions. Not enough answers. Something told him. Anyway, he frowned, fighting to keep the sigh from his voice. Nice to meet you. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. He didn't extend his hand. That gesture, once so freely given, was now reserved only for the hand-picked few he genuinely trusted. Something told him that Minato would never be one of those people. Pleased to meet you, Naruto-san. Musubi smiled brightly. Energetic one, that, me as well, Minato replied nervously. Under normal circumstances Naruto considered himself to be a patient man. He'd put up with all kinds of crap during the Fourth Shinobi War, perhaps even more so, upon being flung into the future. But if there was one thing he would not tolerate, it was indecisiveness. Disorder and indecision had prevailed more than once when they, for crying out loud, if you're a man, stand up straight and talk like one. Have some confidence, goddammit. Hi, gods, all we need now is Uzume and we'll have a full set of misfits. Just then the sound of footsteps came from down the hall and a voice whined, I'm so tired. Mia, is Naruto back yet? Aha. Said blonde grunted in surprise as he came face with the devil herself, violently glommed by yet another well-endowed young woman, this one with long, dark brown hair framing a hair-shaped face and radiant caramel-colored eyes. As always she kept that hair in a ponytail on the left side and let the rest fall down behind her back. And as always, she was strutting around in her underwear. Hello, Uzume-chan. Don't you? Hello Uzume-chan, me, bro. The Jinkuzuriki felt a hot flush crawl up the back of his neck as her mashed up against his chest, her finger poking him pointedly in the collarbone to emphasize each and every syllable. You're late. Dinner was hours ago. I called. He defended himself staunchly. Yeah, but I missed you. She feigned a pout, accentuating the syllables with a teasing thrust of her hips. You need to come home more often. He knew she was deliberately messing with him just to see what he would do, but it still took a considerable amount of willpower not to spin and around and kiss her breathless sometimes. Uzume was beautiful in every sense of the word. If he hadn't known her for the last year and if it weren't for Akatsu waiting for him upstairs, he'd probably be screwing her silly by now. Not that Minato or Musubi knew that, new to Maison Izumo as they were. The poor boy looked as though he were about to suffer an aneurysm out of sheer sexiness. Musubi just looked, confused. Yuck. Uzume sniffed suddenly, frowning at him, words drawing him back to the present as she clutched her nose. You stink. Did you get into another fight again? She eyed his tattered clothes once over, frowning at the torn seams and the blood stains there. She didn't flinch as Minato and Musubi had knowing enough about issues and not being one to pry. What did it matter if she assumed he'd gotten into a fight instead of killing 4 armed men tonight? He was content to allow her the ignorance, so long as it preserved their strange little friendship. Hey, they started it. He feigned a pout. Ah, poor baby. Want me to wash your back? She grinned, cooing softly. Naruto's left eye twitched. 2 could play that game. Want me to wash yours, darling? He purred silkily, using the same voice that once made Hinata weak in the knees when they were young. He might not be a master of women, but he knew enough of their triggers to mess with all but the foulest of female minds. Granted, Uzume was normally immune to such things of course, but it was always fun to mess with her. Surprisingly, the brunette smiled. The look in her eyes was very real. It reminded him of the hooded gaze Hinata would often give him when they put Hoshi to sleep, only different. Yes, this was different. The lust in those eyes was very real, far too fresh, as though someone had simply flicked a switch in her mind and let the floodgates flow free. Abruptly, the buxom brunette flushed. Maybe later, she spluttered, jerking back as if she'd been burned. Gee, good night. Naruto wasn't listening. His eyes stayed glued to her, perfectly toned, as she swiftly sashayed her way out of the room and bolted up the stairs. Goddamn, he needed to cool his head. Right now, he wasn't in the right mind for any of this. Instead, he climbed the stairwell after her. Musubi blinked. Are they going to wash each other's backs, Minato-san? No, I don't think so. Uzume slammed the door as hard as she could, as though the sound might somehow dissuade the blonde behind her from entering. She slammed her back against it and stayed there, hoping to God he didn't come after her, and yet praying that he would. Thankfully he didn't hear anything more than the man's muffled footfalls as the novelist continued past her door and on his way to his own. Even then, she couldn't completely purge her pounding pulse, her heart hammering in her ears like the drums of a great hunt out for her blood. Crap, was her first thought. Shit, was the second. What the hell was that? Was I really thinking of? I almost ended up emerging. Bad Uzume, reacting like that all of a sudden. Even now she could still feel the heat warming her cheeks, a terrible heat welling up from her very core. Her face felt hot, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was reacting to Naruto. The closest thing to this she'd experienced had been nearly a year ago at the hospital, when she'd encountered that frail-looking girl, but she hadn't emerged then. Was it because he'd been with her? Was she reacting now because he'd winged that other Sekirei, the one she'd seen his doppelganger carrying? Or had he not winged, and was merely looking after her? She didn't know. Damn, but she cared. Maybe if she had been winged back then, she wouldn't feel this way. Well, that was neither here nor there. The fact stood that she wasn't winged, and she was reacting to the drop-dead gorgeous novelist next door. A perverted novelist, one who wrote naughty novels. Surely he wouldn't mind. Thin line of blood trickled down her nose at the thought. Stoop. She wanted to wail and tear at her hair. Stupid body, you stop it right now. Oh God, what am I going to do? She'd known the enigmatic blonde for nearly a year now. The blonde's strange fascination for all things ramen was borderline psychotic, something she often teased him on. He gave as good as got. More than once she had been on the receiving end of perverted prank or worse. But that was just it. This shouldn't be happening. They'd teased and flirted like this for some time, but it hadn't really gone anywhere. Until 5 seconds ago, when he spoken those fateful words. Want me to wash yours, darling? The second moment he'd said those last words to her, she'd nearly jumped him right then and there. It had taken every ounce of her not inconsiderable willpower to resist all those urges. But even here, in the sanctity of her room, they were still there, thinly leashed, ready to break free a moment's notice. Oh dear sweet Kami. Uzume choked on her own spit, realizing she was in the process of opening her door. What was she thinking? She couldn't just barge into his room and demand that he wing her. Couldn't she? He was faster than her. She knew that much, but if she could surprise him. I hope I don't regret this. After what felt like an eternity, she turned the handle. So, that's what's going on, Huh. Akatsu nodded in silent accord, those glacial eyes never leaving his for so much as an instant. Shy, nervous, afraid, he could feel her emotions roiling through the bond, and sensed that she was waiting for his answer now that she'd told him everything. Naruto was suddenly intensely glad his clone had given her one of his overly large shirts to wear. Though orange shirt was at least one size too large for her, it was a sore sight better than walking in on her. Now, he had his answers. Problem was, he wasn't entirely sure he liked them. Slowly but surely, in her own halting tones, she'd told him of the Sekirei plan and all that it entailed. Needless to say, Naruto was left feeling quite conflicted. Intrigue warred with disgust deep inside him, and, for a time it seemed neither would emerge victorious. On one hand, the idea of a battle royale with the capital as their playground was enough to get his blood pumping. He hadn't had any real fun since coming to this world after all, and some of these Sekirei sounded as though they would make admirable opponents. But on the other, he was furious, irate, that someone would allow people to form such strong bonds only to have them torn apart again in battle. He'd had enough of that during the Fourth Shinobi War. All those bonds he'd formed with his friends, senselessly torn to pieces by Madara's mad machinations. Whatever strange connection he'd formed with Akatsu, he didn't want to see that lost. It was so strange, but he valued their connection. The idea of losing her suddenly too painful to think about. If someone tried to take her from him, Ashikabi-sama, you're bleeding. Akatsu's eyes traveled down to his palm where his fingernails had bit into flesh. Indeed, he could see tiny red droplets trickling out of his palm. Worry suffused his thoughts, and the shinobi needed to forcibly remind himself that those weren't his thoughts. They were Akatsu's. It's nothing, he reassured her, seeking to divert the topic. By the way, you never told me what your number was. Number 7, Akatsu. Naruto frowned, perplexed by that one. He vaguely recalled Musubi being number 88. So Akatsu was 7th, then. Did that mean something? She hadn't exactly been a wellspring of information after all, only telling him the threadbare details she knew of the Sekirei plan. It was enough to satiate his curiosity somewhat, but it still left him too many uncensored questions. He needed answers. Spending a lifetime as a civilian in this age hadn't dulled his curiosity any. If anything, it had only made him more knowledgeable. And the idea of lacking knowledge in a citywide battle made where your next opponents could be stalking right around the next corner made him very nervous indeed. Is your number important? Ah, yes. She blinked, a lone tear falling from her eye. I was to be the 7th, released, until. Wah hey, he choked in surprise. Why are ya crying? Because I'm happy. Despite the tears gathering in her eyes, the monotone of her voice hardly wavered. Before, I was broken, couldn't have an Ashikabi. Now, I have you. I'm not broken anymore. Unbidden, the teeniest of sobs fled from her lips, her great emotions finally getting the better of her. Why you're not going to abandon me too, are you? Naruto bristled, suddenly overcome with the murderous desire to find the scum who had made her think this way and end him. Painfully, cast her aside, bah, as if we're capable of such a thing. He'd become utterly incapable of doing anything to hurt her the moment he'd first laid eyes on her, long before the bond had been formed. Strong arms wrapped around her, enfolding her both with warmth. His lips were suddenly on hers. Once more he laid eyes on those beautiful icy wings emerging from her back. The temperature seemed to plummet right before his very eyes, a fine icy mist coating the walls of his room and eliciting a short shiver from the Ashikabi. Just as swiftly as the kiss had begun, however, so did it end. Naruto could have sworn he heard a tiny mewl of protest from his Sekirei as he broke away. That was just fine. More than anything else, Naruto wanted Akatsu to understand that she was not a tool. Not broke. That she was wanted. Of course I won't abandon you, silly girl, he whispered quietly, tracing small circles on her back with his hands. I'd never do that to you. You don't have to worry about that anymore. But just call me Naruto, alright? Ashikabi-sama, just sounds kind weird, ya know. Na Naruto-sama. Before Akatsu could say anything else, the door to their room slammed open with such force that it nearly leapt from its hinge. Despite his honed senses, Naruto started in surprise. He'd been so engrossed in Akatsu that he'd failed to notice the presence outside his room until this very instant. Now he recognized the busty body of a formerly star-wearing woman. Just barely. Uzume, what was up with that outfit? Not that he'd minded, but all that white cloth, the way it accentuated every line of her body, hot damn. Was she into bondage or something? Gah, I can't take it anymore. There was a glazed look in her eyes, one that screamed danger and wanton lust. Naruto, you're mine, ha! Scarce had she spoken than those strange tethers of cloth shot forward. Had he been expecting such an assault, he might have escaped. In his defense, his instincts did kick in, but just a shade too slow. Even as he tossed himself off the bed and out of harm's way, she had him. Too late, he found himself held fast, his arms and legs ruthlessly bound at his sides in an iron vice. It would have been child's play to break free, but in that instant he was too shell-shocked to do anything more than blink at his snug shackles. It was a serious slip, one he'd be chastising himself for later. But for now his mind was right in the gutter. Uzume-chan. Akatsu lacked any such temptations of the flesh. No sooner had she seen her Ashikabi been bound than the Yuki Onna sprang into action, the room temperature plummeting as she called upon the power of her element. Even as Uzume started forward, she found a wall of ice there to greet her trespass, forcing her to vault out into the hall just to escape an frigid end. Shit, too late, she realized she still had Naruto bound up in her clothes. The poor blonde was immediately hauled out into the hallway after her, smacking his head on the ceiling as she shot backwards in retreat. Ow, the blonde hissed. Sorry. So, he started amicably, there a particular reason why you're kidnapping me? Uzume flushed. How the hell was he so calm? Well, that is to say. Oi, on your right, Uzume squeaked as a large icicle embedded itself into the wall mere millimeters from her head. Akatsu. The single digit rounded the corner at a much more sedated pace than Uzume, but her eyes bespoke pure death, only slightly offset by the fact that she was clad in little more than the blonde's oversized t-shirt. Put him down. Ah, Naruto blinked. You might want to listen to her. I think she's serious. TCH. The veil-wielding Sekirei silently swore to herself. Her cloth was all but useless in such close confines. Had she been in a more open space, she might have stood a decent chance against this icy terror. Perhaps, if she were more focused on her surroundings, she might have been able to avoid what came next. As it were, she was far too focused on the danger ahead to realize who was approaching from behind. It was only when a dull aura of death swarmed over her that she realized whom she'd forgotten. Uzume-san. Gay. A sheathed sword shouldn't be able to hit so hard. But hit hard Mia did, effectively flattening the buxom brunette in one swift swat of her longsword. That was all the time Akatsu needed to pounce, several spikes of ice swiftly slamming into the deceptively fast tethers of the cloth-wielding Sekirei, pinning her in place. Naruto grunted once, effortlessly managing to right himself a split second before he slammed into the floor. With her Ashikabi out of harm's way, Akatsu might have moved in for the kill, only for Mia to swat her as well, knocking the ice wielder to the ground in quick succession directly next to Uzume. Certainly, it made for quite the sight, one bound blonde and two half-women sprawled out in the hallway. Yup, the sword-wielding landlady was definitely going to jump to assumptions here. Era, she giggled darkly, a shroud of darkness seeming to drape itself across the room. Uzume-san, you know violence is strictly prohibited here at Maison Izumo. I may have to kick you out for attacking Naruto-kun like that. Wait just a minute. The beaten brunette sputtered, drawing back in the face of the landlady's overwhelming aura. I wasn't going to hurt him, Mia. Really, I swear, I just wanted to kiss him. It was the wrong thing to say and she realized it only after the fact. I can't explain. It's just that, oh crap. She paled visibly when the landlady's menacing energy didn't abate in the slightest if anything, that evil-looking hernia hanging over shoulders seemed to grow even larger. Come on, bro. Her entire body shook and quivered in terror. It oddly reminded Naruto of when he had watched a single leaf hold on with all its might to a tree branch as a storm tried to rip it from its perch. Call her off before she kills me. Naruto pretended to consider it for a moment. Well, you did attack me. Naruto. Alright, the blonde sighed. Mia, stop. I can vouch for her. She didn't have any killing intent. Her reaction was spot on. Very well, but no breakfast for either of you. I can live with that. A slight tick mark appeared over her delicate brow. No lunch, either. Mia, Naruto and Uzume could have been siblings with the way they whined in unison. Ah, does that include me? All eyes turned toward poor Akatsu, almost forgotten in the chaos. Of course you do, Akatsu-chan. Mira smiled motherly, choosing not to deny the recently winged sekire a meal. You're a good girl. Ah. She blinked, flushing at the praise. I'm a good girl. Of course you are. That smile was nothing short of serene, almost, masking the subtle killing intent behind it. Just make sure to resist your partner's beastly desires or I'll have to throw both of you out. Yet again a sleeve rose to mask her mirth. You foo. Naruto's eyes shot open. Partner. How did she know about that? Well, I must be getting to bed. I trust the three of you will pay for the damages, Without another word she turned primly and strode back the way from whence she'd come. There was no question about it there, not in the slightest. That was a statement. They'd be fixing this out of their own pocket. Now, while Naruto might be physically stronger than Mia, even he wasn't willing to argue the matter after everything that had just happened. Besides, this fiasco was technically his fault. Despite her mastery over ice, Akatsu shivered. Mia-sama is scary. You'll get used to it, Akatsu. The ice user fervently shook her head. She didn't understand how Ashikabi could look into that horrifying darkness and remain unrankled. Well, now that we've settled that, Naruto heaved a heavy sigh of his own. Now that the shock of being tied up had worn off, suffice it to say he was a bit baffled. Most men would have started to freak. The blonde simply shrugged his shoulders and shredded the steel-tight tethers of cloth bogging him down before turning his attention to Uzume. The brunette wilted beneath his glare. You, he began pointedly, have some explainin' to do. Nestled safely in her secret room, a buxom redhead watched over those proceedings with great amusement, grinning as her screen lit up with light. She had eyes everywhere in Maison Izumo, in places not even Naruto knew of. Oh, he knew she was here of course, but he'd never been curious enough to seek her out directly. For that, she was grateful. Given the blonde's aggressive tendencies, she was almost certain any face-to-face meeting wouldn't end in her favor should she make an attempt on his supposed chastity. Yes, after what she'd just seen, surprise attacks were definitely no good. No good at all. It was no good going after him unless he was vulnerable, she decided. Especially after this. But she'd been watching him for quite some now, and after nearly a year of observation she believed she knew the perfect place and opportunity to pounce upon the unsuspecting shinobi. Chuckling, she adjusted her glasses and began typing rapidly at the keyboard, fingers flying a mile a minute. Uhuhuhu. Naruto-tan, I can't wait to experiment on you. Naruto suddenly felt a cold chill come over him in his room, as though someone were thinking of doing all manner of perverted things to him. Strange. It hadn't come from Akatsu, so never mind. He'd figure it out sooner or later once things settled down. Summarily, Uzume's explanation proved rather short when compared to Akatsu's. She didn't have nearly as much to answer for, save the destruction of his door and her reaction to him, then the attempted smooch of his person. Beyond that, hey, that was a lot. So let's get this straight. The eternal shinobi began to count off on his fingers. First, you're a sekirei. At the latter's nod, he relentlessly pressed on. Second, you're reacting to me. Third, in your infinite wisdom, you thought it would be a good idea to try and kidnap me, force yourself on me, and ignore the consequences. Uzume blanched. Well, when you put it that way. Baka. The brunette yelped as he lightly swatted her on the back of the head. Why didn't you tell me? We could have talked about this. I thought you knew. You mean to tell me you've been here for a year now and you didn't realize I wasn't normal? Oi, I just found out about the sekirei plan today. He snapped back, his forehead pressed against hers. You're doing it again, she gasped out, cheeks flushed. Come here. Hey, Naruto yelped, narrowly dodging backwards when she tried to make a grabs at him. Get a hold of yourself. There was such need in her voice that it actually hurt to resist, let alone listen. This close, he could physically feel her emotions washing over him, a searing tide that made a volcano look like it was lukewarm. I want you. I need you. Please be mine. Please. 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 There was no hesitation in them, a yearning so strong it made his skin tingle with desire that wasn't quite his own. This was no game to Uzume. Her feelings weren't fake. They were real. As real as anything else in this world. What part about me wanting to kiss your brains out did you not understand? That much is obvious. I didn't choose this, alright. She hissed, exasperated. I'm just reacting to you for some reason. Hot tears swam in her eyes as she saw his confusion. I can't just switch this off, Naruto no Baka. It's you. There's no one else. It has to be you, or nothing at all. Another wave swept over him, forcing him to grip the floor for restraint. He'd known Uzume for a year, but to hear her begging him like this, arg. He didn't know if it was her or him or what was causing this. After locking his heart away, to suddenly open it to not one, but two different women. Akatsu. He cast about for his first sekirei, seeking her opinion. He'd sworn never to betray her, and he wasn't about to start now. If she didn't want him to do this, then he would honor his promise. Ah. She blinked as his gaze fell upon her. There was nothing in her voice to suggest she was at all against such a thing. I don't mind. If Uzume-san is reacting to you, you shouldn't leave her alone. Would you rather I be winged by some asshole? The busty brunette challenged haughtily. Naruto thought back to the four men who'd nearly accosted Akatsu. What would have happened if he hadn't been there? The idea of a sekirei being winged by anyone other than her destined one was a concept as sick as it was repulsive. For feelings so strong as this to be forced upon someone against their will. That decided it. Are you sure you want this? Yes. There was no plea in her voice, just complete and utter surety. As stupid as it sounds, you're the one I want, Baka. Baka? Huh. Naruto laughed at that. Well, when you put it like that, who am I to refuse? It was like lifting a great and terrible weight from his shoulders. He was left feeling lighter than he'd ever before. Ironically, the second he'd spoken, another one settled against him. Uzume crawled her way up into his lap, tenderly forcing him to the floor. This time, Naruto didn't resist. He let her straddle him, the weight of her body gently nestling against his hips with only a slight discomfort. I'm yours, Uzume whispered, cupping his cheek in hand, many years to come. With that, she lowered her mouth to his. Why do I get the feeling I'm going to be hearing that allo mmph? All thought ceased to be as her lips pressed against his. Warm. There was a gentleness to her kiss that bespoke of an infinite dedication. Kindness. A little silliness. But she meant well. He felt his strength flow into hers and hers into his as another bond was born, no less ironclad than the one he shared with Akatsu. I'm yours. Forever. All this and more was conveyed in that single kiss as he winged her. Wings. He watched them, pure streamers of white cloth erupting out of her back in glorious fashion. And then it was done. Oh God, Uzume sighed heavenly, dropping herself into the crook of his right arm. That feels so much better. Ah. Akatsu was suddenly there, claiming the left. Me too. Oi, I can't move. Congratulations. Everyone startled as the television blared to life, revealing a strange man with white hair. The hell? Naruto frowned, reaching for the remote. Must have turned on by accident. No. The man wailed. Don't turn it off. The blonde hesitated, just for a second. Long enough for the strange man to peer forwards. Oh ho. He cackled. I was about to congratulate on winging Akatsu earlier, but it seems you've already winged another when I wasn't looking. As expected of you, Naruto-kun. Hello, Uzume-chan. How have you been? Blah. The brunette stuck out her tongue in mockery. Naruto didn't share the sentiment. How did this man know him? How much did he know? Was his identity compromised? Would he have to leave Shinto Tito? The thought wouldn't have troubled him before, but now that he had Akatsu and Uzume, he was strangely reluctant to leave the capital. Naruto frowned, blue eyes narrow and angry. Who the hell are you? How do you know my name? I'm Manaka Hiroto, the CEO of MBI, came the nonsensical reply. And you know my name, how? My dear boy, I know everything about you. Including that nasty little incident in the park this evening. Quite a bit of work, that. However did you burn that one man? I'd love to have my researchers study you, but I digress. Setting all that aside, you are now part of the Sekirei plan. Manaka said with glee as he crossed his hands in front of him. That's the name of the game of which you are now a proud participant. I trust Akatsu-chan has already told you as much. Wait, you burned someone? Uzume gawped. Damn, that's hardcore. He did it too. Save me. Akatsu supplied. Wow, seriously. At the latter's nod, Manaka merrily continued. Anyhow, since you now know about my Sekirei plan, you are contractually obliged to keep it a secret from anyone else that doesn't already know. In the case that you leak any information, our MBI will retaliate with all our force and ability and bully you into oblivion. No need for that, Naruto drawled, quietly boiling on the inside. See, I've already decided to play this little game of yours. You have, but of course I have. In spite of his intense ire, the last living Uzumaki couldn't quite keep the smile from his face. Nor did he bother to restrain his killing intent as he drew Uzume and Akatsu deeper into his embrace, despite the weak protest that the former offered. And, Manaka, when I win, for making everyone suffer through your shitty little plans. Oh, the shinobi's grin as he slashed a thumb across his throat made Mia look comparatively tame by comparison. I'm going to kill you. There was a silence, and then, I look forward to pitting my wits against you, Naruto-kun. For the first time since they'd met, the CEO sounded genuinely serious. Just like that, his goofy persona remerged. It shall be a battle of the ages. Count on it. Naruto Marifly flipped him the bird and, before the whitehead could get another word in edgewise, shut down the television. Uzume gulped. Did you just do what I think you did? Declare war on a major company that controls the capital. Naruto blinked, utterly unconcerned. Yeah, I've done worse in my lifetime. Another silence as he awaited the inevitable rebuke. Her grin caught him totally unprepared. That was hot. On there you have it. This Naruto is slightly different the norm that I write, primarily in the fact that this Naruto is a great deal darker than most. The focus was on almost entirely on him this chapter, although Uzume stole the spotlight towards the end. Now before anyone gets angry, I want to say this, I have nothing against Chiho. Also, I ask you to remember this. Naruto has been at Maison Izumo for more than a year. It was only natural that his presence would change things story-wise. Furthermore, I couldn't stand the way Higa used our little number 10 to do his dirty work. It pissed me the hell off. Naruto's flung down that old gauntlet, and declared war, folks. Now, to answer your questions. Minato, yes, he is in this story, but his role will be greatly reduced compared to the events of canon. Naruto's the star here, not him. He does have Musubi, Then possibly Kusano as events progress, but let me be quite clear when I say that he isn't going to be getting a major flock in this story. Putting that aside, I'm not going to bash him either. Naruto's ire at meeting him simply reflected the fact that he hates indecisiveness. I'm also sure y'all noticed that Karasuba bit in the beginning. Yes, she will be in this, and yes, it will cause all sorts of hell for our protagonist. That is going to be fun to write. Naruto does not tolerate any enemies, as you see he has a nasty habit of eradicating anyone who stands against him, and that attitude, alongside his strength, attracts Karasuba greatly. There may be other less powerful Sekirei involved in this tale as well, i.e. Yushima, Taki, etc., but Naruto's flock won't grow too big. Saying any more would spoil the story. Next chapter we get right down to the nitty-gritty. It'll be out soon, providing my health holds, so look forward to it, ya know. Anywho, I worked extremely hard on this one, so I hope to hear what you think. Pairing is up in the air. You decide. As said before, I have a vague idea who will be a part of Naruto's flock in this, but the rest it's entirely up to y'all. And on a final note, thank you to everyone offering emotional support in regard to my health woes. It's greatly appreciated. An awful lot is going to change in this story soon. Look forward to an epic prank next chapter, provided my health holds out. So, in the immortal words of Atlas. Review, would you kindly? And of course, enjoy the preview. It's a massive, action-packed one. Hopefully it will tide you over until the next chapter comes out later this week. Preview. So MBI's after me, huh? Naruto cocked his head aside, curious. And they sent their strongest dogs. Whatever for. That's none of your goddamn business. Benetsubasa snapped, grinding her knuckles together. You may have killed those punks, but you're nothing without your Sekirei. So you'd better come quietly or what? She barely had time to register those words before Naruto did something with his hand and sent Hihane sprawling. Then he was upon her. See, I don't think you understand the position you're in, bitch. Naruto growled, his voice low and throaty, eyes pulsating a dangerous red. You think you're pretty tough. But you know what, compared to me, you're nothing. He squeezed down on her throat, his fingers digging angry red lines into the soft flesh of her jugular. He could feel it, her pulse hammering heavily as she struggled to escape the ever-tightening vice. It was like being constricted by a boa. The harder she struggled, the tighter that noose drew around her throat. Benetsubasa gagged, the words refusing to leave her throat as she scrabbled for purchase on those heavy hands. Away. She had to jeer away from this man. Just looking into those eyes reminded her of how small she was compared to him, made her want to gibber like a madwoman. Those eyes. Those damned eyes. They told her he was enjoying this. Every second that she suffered was pure rapture to him. Let go. Oh, I don't think so. Naruto purred, his voice, his tone, eerily reminding her of Karasuba when she was in one of her bloody moods. You see, I've learned something in my travels. When someone tried to kill ya, you can't let them live. You have to put 'em down. Hard. No second chances. It just gives them a chance to come back and haunt you. And you, my dear. Shut up. Her fist smashed into his face with all the force of a piledriver. Naruto didn't so much as bat an eyelash, even as a thin trickle of blood ran down his forehead and spilled onto his cheeks. Wow. He blinked, pausing to lick the red liquid away from his lips. I take back what I said earlier. You're fucking weak. In that instant, Benetsubasa realized something. She wasn't afraid of this man. She was fucking terrified. Still, what should I do with you? Oblivious to her terror, Naruto hoisted her still higher, as though preparing to physically cast her off the bridge itself. She realized why he'd come out here alone now. This far out, there was no one to get in his way, certainly not this late in the evening. Damn it, he'd lured her here to kill her. I'm terribly sorry, but would you please let go of that little one? Benetsubasa craned her head toward the voice and nearly wept with relief when she saw a flash of silver hair, the swirling fabric of a cloak, the clicking of thigh-high boots making their way towards her position in slow and steady steps. Karasuba thanked Kami. She'd never been so happy to see the black Sekirei in all of her life. Now that she was here, this was going to learn his place and why the hell were her arms hurting. Snick. The harrowing crack of bone signaled the end of both her limbs, her shoulders violently broken with such force that her muscles were reduced to fine powder. Benny didn't even have a chance to scream as her aggressor tossed her aside, discarding her broken body as though she were a hapless rag doll. But even then she didn't die. She struck the ground with a rough impact, her head jarring painfully to the side just in time to see the blonde one draw that obscenely large, bandaged blade from his back, a giant weapon as large as he was tall. "What do we have here?" His voice was suddenly different, an almost respectable drawl to it, one of addressing an equal enemy, a worthy opponent. "You here to save your friend?" Benetsubasa whimpered helplessly as the dread steel of the Samahata touched her throat, shivering as her life flashed before her eyes. Not like this. She hadn't won Natsuo over yet. She couldn't die here. Not really. The red Sekirei felt her blood run cold. "What? Oh." Naruto's lips curled in a surprised smile. "Then you won't mind if I kill her?" "Nothing personal, of course. Have to make sure she doesn't come after me for revenge, or anything." In a movement faster than the light-haired lass could comprehend, he raised his blade and swung the deadly edge down. Clang! Steel struck steel as Karasuba's blade intercepted his own, the smaller katana holding the greatsword back without so much as the slightest tremor. Naruto blinked, briefly baffled by the sight of Benetsubasa's head still on her shoulders. Granted, he'd only put half his strength into the swing, but for someone to stand up to him at half power was a feat in and of itself. And then she managed another feat, actually swatting his blade aside with a flick of her wrist, producing a shower of sparks as they twirled away from another. "What's your name?" Naruto inquired, physically fighting to keep the bloodlust from his voice. Not good. He could feel himself starting to slip again. "Number 4, Karasuba." She introduced herself with savage smile of her own. "I'm here for you, Uzumaki Naruto. Won't you give me a good time before you die?" She was suddenly gone. To the normal eye, it looked as though she'd vanished from the face of the earth. Thankfully, Naruto's eyes were anything but normal. That, and he wasn't limited to wielding only one weapon. A swift touch to his wrist activated the storage seal he had planted on his sleeve, releasing another weapon more significant to him since time immemorial. And, there, Kubikiribocho stoically intercepted her assault before it could even begin, the larger blade slamming her smaller sword to the ground in an explosion of asphalt and debris in a bid to force her to release her hold on that deceptively power weapon. Karasuba did no such thing. Naruto cocked his head aside, mildly amused as she held fast, refusing to flinch in the wake of his superior strength. Then he began to press down. Impossibly he found that she was able to resist him to some degree, actually producing a stalemate between the two of them. "You're strong." Karasuba's smile only grew. "Why, thank you. You should probably stop holding back, though." His warning caused her to frown. "You're liable to lose a limb or two if I stop going easy on you." She didn't have time for a witty retort of her own, because in that odd instant, Naruto moved. There could be no other word for it. One moment their blades were tangled up in one another, the next the massive Kubikiribocho was free and screaming down at her head. The lithe Sekirei did not so much as bat an eyelash, nay, in an equally impossible movement of her own her sword flashed up to collide with the crushing cleaver. The ensuing explosion of blade against blade promptly cleaved the bridge in twine and nearly sent poor Benetsubasa tumbling into the drink. Haihane wasn't quite so fortunate as her comrade, the blue Sekir's battered body plunging into the dark, debris-filled waters below. In that instant she didn't know who was more terrifying, Naruto or Karasuba. In the end, it was the former who snickered, riposting away with a mad laugh of his own. "I'm starting to enjoy this, Karasuba-chan." Blood. That was Naruto's first thought when he opened his eyes. It was everywhere, slicking the sky, staining skyscrapers, slithering over his skin, everywhere. The city stank of the stuff, a sickly sweet odor that bespoke of a recent slaughter, short and swift. He realized in short order that this was simply a dream. After all, this wasn't Maison Izumo but the streets of Shinto Tito in which he found himself. But even so, he couldn't help but be riveted by the sight before him, not of the blood, of course he wasn't that violent, but rather, of the woman standing across from him. She cut an imposing figure against the sunset, her black uniform seeming to stem from shadow itself. And then, as though sensing his attention, she turned to face him. It was like staring into the face of death itself, her hazel orbs pinioning him from across the street. His mind analyzed her dispassionately, slender and lithe, tall, silver hair, dead eyes, cold and unfeeling. She smiled at him then, licking the crimson stain from her blade, her words the of whispers. "Do you want to play?" Sanuva. Blue eyes snapped open as Naruto's mind forcibly tore itself free from whatever the hell that had been, squinting as sharp shards of sunlight slashed at his eyes. What a weird dream. Or was it a nightmare? He couldn't be entirely certain after seeing that blood-stained specter. What he did know, however, was that his head felt as though the Jubi had just stomped over it. That was no goddamn dream, he decided. It had been too real. Even now, he could still feel his skin pricking with excitement at the prospect of staking out such a powerful opponent. Vision, then, Ashura chimed helpfully. Probably. Naruto agreed, rubbing the back of his sore head with a hand. You wanna work on this headache for me? I can't think straight like this. Allow me. Though he was little more than a disembodied voice in the back of his head, the son of the sage could still aid him in such things as regeneration and the easing of mental aches. He could even possess Naruto at times to give his Inume reserves an even more substantial boost. But for all his prowess, Ashura simply couldn't help him when it came to controlling their chakra. With no minds to control them, the chakra was all but 9 wild beasts, each struggling to assert itself over one another unless actively suppressed by Naruto. Hence his anger problem. Even now he could feel their chakra writhing within him, demanding action. Frowning, and with minimal effort, he willed his hammering heart to slow. He wasn't that fresh-faced boy anymore, so easily frightened by a bad dream. Or even a vision. It was still a touch unnerving, though. Slowly, he allowed himself to take stock of what he'd experienced. He'd felt an overwhelming sense of bloodlust emanating, followed by a touch of loneliness and coupled by arousal. How was that possible? Had that woman actually gotten off on the idea of fighting him? And why was he suddenly so excited at the prospect of seeing her again? Whatever the case, it was morning. Probably best just to rise and go about his business. If the vision was that important, he'd probably see her later tonight. Ah, Naruto blinked, realizing his head was still resting firmly against this pillow, as was the rest of him. He hadn't been able to move, not in the slightest. The hell was this? Somewhere in the back of his mind, Ashura heaved a small sigh. His ancestor was too good-natured to be so cruel as to laugh at his predicament. He did, however, see fit to give Naruto a nudge to the left. What he saw there nearly took his breath away. Naruto-sama, nestled securely against his arm in nothing short of a vice grip, Akatsu stirred ever so slightly in her sleep, her hooded eyes fluttering as she nestled herself deeper into his chest. In that instant Naruto was suddenly struck by her beauty, despite the fact that she was clad in little more than his oversized t-shirt and a pair of panties. He'd never seen a more flawless sight in his life. Odd, the thought didn't trouble him at all, unlike yesterday. Nay, she was a welcome thought. Just the sight of that adorable porcelain-skinned beauty made him want to reach out with his other arm and stroke her. That was when he became aware of another weight taking up residence on his other arm, this one slightly heavier than the other. He turned his head and got a faceful of brown hair, the chestnut-colored locks tickling at his nose in silent teasing despite her relative lack of consciousness. Wow, was his first thought. You look good with your hair down. Uzume. At some point during the night she had apparently laid claim to his other arm, and discarded most of her clothes. He knew this because it looked as though the brunette had all but kicked her jeans and star shirt across the room, and her previous outfit was nowhere to be seen. He was almost disappointed to see that she'd kept the underwear godamnit shit. That was when the rest of last night's events came crashing down around his ears in a torrent, reminding him of what had happened. What he had said and done. He'd winged Uzume, her and Akatsu. Both of them. The three of them must have fallen asleep in his room at some point, though he wasn't entirely sure when they'd made it into his bed. As if to add insult to injury, both his arms were also asleep. Damn, he murmured, trying to wriggle free, with little luck. Wherever he is, Ero Sennin's probably laughing his off right now. Hua. Naruto froze, realizing he'd spoken over loud. Uzume's doe-like eyes fluttered open almost immediately. It appeared the brunette was a light sleeper indeed. She looked so goddamn cute in that moment, taking one hand away from his arm to knuckle at her eye and yawn utterly oblivious to the blonde in which she had tangled herself. Then her hand landed on his chest, those glassy orbs widening as she realized upon whom she was laying. Uzume peered at him for but a moment, her expression carefully blank as she too recalled what had happened last night, thousands of thoughts ricocheting inside her skull as the star-wearing Sekirei put two and two together. Despite all his power, the blonde gave a small gulp. Ah, Uzume-chan. Suddenly that neutral look vanished, obliterated by a smoldering smile so intense Naruto was certain he could feel himself melting. The bond told him what his Sekirei was about to do, but before he could get his other arm free and escape she kissed him, pushing her lips up into his, thrusting her mouth against him with a passion he'd never before experienced, even in his days as a Konoha shinobi. Once more he saw her wings take flight, but his focus was decidedly elsewhere, such as the things she was doing to him with her tongue, Kami. Desire swamped him in a flood, drowning out common sense. It was pure bliss, as those smooth fingers glided over the hardened plane that was his chest, stirring a side of him he hadn't felt for nearly 4 years. Arg, if only his other arm wasn't held captive. He would have done well, things, to say the least, but as it were he still had his other arm. Eep! The bombshell brunette squeaked as that lone limb snaked around the curve of her waist, decidedly drawing her closer when she tried to break the kiss and pull away. Her skin was warm to the touch, smooth like satin under the rough calluses of his palm, prickling now in gooseflesh as he dared to trace his hand across the base of her spine and stroke the small of her back. His poor victim shot ramrod straight, eyes wide as she saw that her victim wasn't entirely bedridden as she'd first thought. "Mornin'. Good morning yourself, missy." His voice was surprisingly husky even to his own ears. "Tell me, do you think I'd just let you sneak away after that? Maybe. Try no." His lips drifted toward hers. "Be baka." Uzume protested and tried to grab him, but the word was without rancor, her limbs lacking strength. "Don't you dare." Too late. She felt his teeth nip hold of her neck in gentle kiss, then another, and another still. Her mouth opened in silent protest as his lips caged hers, hands gripping his hair as the first knife of pleasure sank into her crest, her wings blooming in a shower of white. Then his tongue was attacking hers as though they were completely at war, just the two of them, stabbing, swirling, razor blades of pleasure cutting her senses into tiny pieces in swift succession. Uzume wasn't entirely certain when she'd started moaning his name, only that her throat was suddenly raw and she could barely speak by the time he finally pulled away. "You, glorious bastard," she gasped out. "You know you love me." He snicked. Their lips collided again in another tangle of passion that left her panting and mewling for more. "Did I ever say that? Never hurts to hear it again." The blonde shrugged. Her cheeks lit up scarlet. "Oh, Kami." He was really going to make her say it. "Then I'll say it again. I love you, Naruto." There was a certainty, a happiness in her voice that made Naruto shiver. Even now, he could feel their bond between them, in a steady stream of warm, almost playful thoughts suffusing his bones. She was utterly delighted to see him, relieved that it hadn't been a dream. So was he. The whole idea of Sekirei had been nothing short of astounding. So fantastic that he'd been half convinced it was all a dream conjured up by a mind deprived of intimacy for far too long. After all, he hadn't touched a woman since Hinata and Hoshi had died. The idea of being with someone after losing his wife and daughter had been contrived as impossible until he'd first met Uzume last year, and even then, the most they'd done was mess with one another, two sad souls taking whatever moments of amusement they could. Never in his wildest dreams had he ever considered this possibility, the idea of having such a beautiful woman in his arms, gasping his name in utter ecstasy. For the longest times he'd kept his heart firmly locked and armored away. Uzume had produced a chink in that armor when they'd first met, and Akatsu had unknowingly hammered it home, shattering it entirely. Now that he'd finally let several someones back in, he felt good. Better than good, actually, it could be said. He felt healed, whole, as if they'd been waiting all this time for that very moment. A second pair of arms encircled Naruto's waist as Akatsu embraced him from behind. The silent ice Sekirei said nothing at first. She simply held tightly to the now baffled shinobi and gave him what support and comfort she could. I love Naruto-sama, too. She nuzzled her head into H's neck for emphasis, to which the blonde opened his mouth to reply, but then he noticed something. He could feel the woman's bare thigh rubbing up against his bare back, which should have been impossible. Unless, Akatsu. Yes. Where are your panties? A blink. I forgot to wear them. She's joking, right? Ashura deadpanned. She had them on last night. Naruto agreed with him. One did have to look far to see that they'd been flung halfway across the room at some point. Is that so? There was a silence as both blonde and brunette realized Akatsu had somehow kicked the underwear off during the middle of the night. That broke the moment into 1,000 pieces. Uzume was suddenly laughing, hooting loudly despite her own, practically weeping from merriment. Akatsu cocked her head aside, confused. Naruto couldn't help but snicker as well. He didn't know if the lack of underwear was a deliberate act on her part or an unconscious one. He just felt light laughing. How long had it been since he'd really laughed? Really smiled? Not since he'd lost everything back in the past. To do so now was cleansing, in more ways than one. He chuckled, silently consigning himself to the strange fate that Kami had decided to saddle him with. Oh Akatsu, he sighed as his warm lips claimed hers, promise me you'll never change. Hi. Unfortunately, their amusement was short-lived however, as the edge of a sword found Naruto's throat. Era, a familiar voice crooned from beyond the doorway, it looks like you're going to lose much more than dinner tonight, Naruto-kun. Ashura chuckled. I do so love it when she's angry. The last Uzumaki froze, but for just an instant. Then he smiled. Anyone who'd been a resident of Maison Izumo for more than a year knew that smile. It spelled trouble. Are we really going to play that game again, Mia? He dipped a hand into his pocket, the movement faster than the eye could see. You know what happened last time. Her only response was to tighten the blade across his throat. Poof. A lot of things happened once Naruto threw down that smoke bomb. Simultaneously Mia's brow tightened as the sudden explosion of smoke blinded her, a flicker of motion in her parafiel serving to show her where the blonde had gone. In that same instant she was almost certain she felt a hand grab her. At which she swung down mercilessly into the smog, only to find the sheathed edge of her sword buried into a harmless log, complete with a smiley face and all the trappings to make it resemble the blonde. And there, written across it in bold black marker, for all eyes to see. Mia no baka. Oh. Uzume gulped. Here it comes. There was a terrible, awful silence as Uzume and Akatsu watched a sudden change come over their landlady, her eyes glowing a sinister scarlet in the shadow of those lavender locks. Slowly and painstakingly, she drew her katana, its steel slithering out the hilt with an almost poppable hiss as she stalked out of the room. There was another silence, their dread becoming almost stifling as only her footsteps could be heard, receding back towards the veranda. Then, nothing. Had he somehow escaped Mia's wrath? A deafening crash swiftly disabused them of that notion. And if that wasn't enough, Mia's shriek certainly did the trick. Naruto. The sage cackled madly as he dove back into the room and flung himself out the window. You'll never take me alive. Meanwhile, in the streets of Shinto Tito, a young woman paused. Just now, what was that feeling? She blinked, touching a hand to her, wondering at her hammering heart beneath. For a moment there, it had skipped a beat. Even now, it was still racing. She was getting close. Just now, she had been reacting to someone. To her ashikabi. Of that much, she was certain. It was so strange. She'd had this fleeting sensation for some time now, but it seemed to be growing stronger the further north she went. North. That was where she needed to go. That was where he was. Her Ashibaki-sama. She'd seen him in her dreams time and time again, a young man with a broad back and blonde hair, standing away from her as though from all but a great distance. His face was still a mystery to her, but his voice his voice was not. Find me. Even now she could hear those words in her head. Watch where you're going. Hey. Yushima frowned as a body jostled hers, suddenly painfully aware of the attention she was drawing to herself. Everyone was staring at her. It wasn't that she was ugly, far from it. She considered herself to be relatively average when it came to looks. Unfortunately, that didn't help her any. Because they kept staring. They were everywhere, even here in this bad part of town, with so few people to say. They stared at her, leering. But she kept walking, and they kept staring. Not that she blamed them. All right, maybe she did. But just a little. She could feel their eyes wherever she went, drawn not to her, but the massive weapon she dragged in her wake. A small part of her grumbled about that, anger lurking beneath the facade of her calm persona. Whilst most of her sisters were at least granted some vestige of appearing normal to the average bystander, it was notoriously difficult for her to do so while hauling a giant hammer after her. She could always make use of her agility, but a girl running at full tilt with a freaking hammer in hand was just as liable to draw attention as one walking. So she walked on, steadily making her way north. Hey bitch, what's up with the hammer? A voice asked. You some kind of cosplayer or something? Yoshimi half turned her head at the sound of the voice, but no, it wasn't him. Thug. That was what she labeled this man the moment she laid eyes on him. He struck her as the brutish type, what with his sneer and those beady little eyes. There was something about those eyes, she didn't like it. You're kinda hot, he said, touching her face. You should be my girl. What? I wasn't asking. He tried to pull her closer then. Yushima froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. She took one step back. Then another. No, this wasn't the man. Something snapped inside of her the moment he cupped her chin, eyes widening as he tried to force his lips on hers against her will. Anger, the other half of her psyche that she worked so terribly hard to suppress, came surging forth, and her hammer swung upwards with speeds no human could possibly hope to match in this life or the next, descending mercilessly on the hapless human. It's not you, bastard. Junichi Tanagawa would never understand why the hammer-wielding Sekirei killed him that day, but regardless, all of Shinto Tito was a better place for it. With Naruto. By the time the chaos finally died down, half of Maison Izumo had been laid to waste. Naruto had proved damn near impossible to catch, and although Mia had tried her darndest at it, and by the time she finally did, she simply wasn't up to the task. An peerless warrior the first Sekirei might be, but she was far and away no match for the sage when fighting at full strength. That didn't mean she hadn't gotten a few good shots in, though. She was fairly certain she'd managed to get in at least one good smack before he took her down. Poor Minato would forever be traumatized by the sight of those twin titans waging war on one another. It had been like watching two demons fight. The most terrifying battle he'd ever seen. Even Akatsu, stoic as they came, was left aghast by the path of destruction her Ashikabi had carved into the inn. Only Uzume and Kagari remained unfazed by the Chua's. Apparently Naruto's and Mia's spars, as they called them, were something of a regular occurrence at the inn. Try telling that to Musubi. The moment she'd seen them fighting she'd all but begged to spar with them. That was part of the reason they weren't going at it right now. In the end, an uneasy truce was finally called later that morning. Mia wouldn't try to carve his balls off again so long as the blonde kept his beastly urges out of Maison Izumo. So here they were, gathered around the table, 3 Sekirei and 2 Ashikabi, whilst Mia quietly tended to breakfast in the kitchen. Which Naruto still wasn't getting, despite their earlier battle and Musubi's attempt to jump into it. Regardless, reintroductions had been made, in Uzume's case, and now Akatsu. You have 2 Sekirei, Minato spluttered, morose, suddenly fearful upon his senpai's admission. When did that happen? Oh, places. Naruto shrugged, not one to espouse. When the blonde didn't elucidate him, the poor student looked positively pale. Ah, Akatsu inclined her head politely, thankfully now clad in one of Uzume's old outfits, a snug pair of blue jeans and a frost-colored shirt. Pleased to meet you. It would do until Naruto could take her out shopping for new clothes later. He had burned through an outfit fighting Mia too. Surprise. Uzume teased, sticking out her tongue. Better be careful, we just might sneak up on you. She'd meant it as joke, but now the kid looked crestfallen. As though someone had just told him that his mother died or something. Damn, talk about your lack of confidence. No way, Ma, relax. The shinobi soothed, biting back irritation of his own. I'm not one to fight unless provoked. So long as you stay on my good side, you should be fine. Just a gentle reminder there. You might get killed if ya try something, ya know. Naruto said this as though they were discussing something as simple as the weather, not a matter of life and death. The fear rushed back into Minato. Don't say that, don't say that. Please don't say that. Relax, kid, it was a joke. Naruto sighed, his shoulders drooping with the exhalation. He didn't feel animosity for the poor boy. Just pity. He had to be scared out of his mind. What with this battle royale business and only one slightly ditzy Sekirei between him and certain doom. Honestly, he felt sorry for the poor kid now that he knew he was part of Monaka's little game. Perhaps that pity was why he almost didn't notice the gleam in Musubi's eyes. Almost, but a shinobi was always aware, always watching his surroundings. And when Musubi leapt up he was ready. Looking back, the fist-type Sekirei didn't truly understand what had happened, not at first. One moment, she was launching forward to give her number and challenge Uzume and Akatsu to an honorable battle. The next she was intercepted, Naruto's palm placing itself firmly in the path of her punch. Musubi was already in motion, her fist hyperextended. She couldn't have held back even if she tried. Oddly enough, she didn't send the man flying. She didn't even budge him. He simply caught the blow in hand and held there, making it impossible for her to pull it back. Now, Miu-chan, he smiled benignly as he addressed her, much in the way Karasuba-sama often did, only worse. You know violence is not permitted here at Maison Izumo. Still, it would be such a shame were I to terminate you for attacking one of my girls, don't you agree? Before her very eyes his voice seemed to change, a strange, pale, 10-tailed creature roiling into existence over his shoulders, lone eye locking on her with frightening intent and murderous disparity. Nay. Musubi squeaked and nodded an affirmative. Naruto-san was scarier than the landlady. Hi, good girl. Now out you go. Time out. With that he wrenched her aside with the other, bodily flinging her out of the room and into the yard at their backs. He didn't have to worry about hurting a Sekirei of her caliber, it was just a gentle lesson to the naive young woman. One does not with Uzumaki Naruto. Sorry, Musubi, Uzume shouted at her back. We really don't feel like fighting right now. Ah, Akatsu blinked, realizing something. Musubi's being punished. Naruto opened his eyes and looked up into the sky and watched the clouds float gently away. This was nice, he thought. Life at Maison Izumo had been too quiet as of late until yesterday, and he welcomed the change in scenery with relish. Sometimes, change was good. Sometimes, it was needed. Now that he had Uzume and Akatsu with him, his life was bound to be interesting, even with Mia blocking him at the worst of times. He swore that they would come to no harm, come hell or high water. And with Minato and Musubi as new tenants, he seriously doubted that karma was going to leave him alone. No, his peaceful life was officially extinct for better or worse, and he was content with him. There were already 3 Sekirei living under Mia's roof. The sage had the strangest feeling there would be more, soon. It promised to be entertaining, no less. Anyo. Naruto blinked, realizing that Minato was trying with little success to speak. Something you wanted? I was just wondering. The boy faltered a moment under his gaze. Have you been having any, dreams, lately? Dreams? Hi. What kinda dreams? Unbidden, his mind flashed back to that bloody woman. He considered admitting it, then thought better of it. Wouldn't do for Uzume and Akatsu to think their Ashikabi was crazy now, would it? It was probably nothing in any case, maybe not even a vision as he suspected. I had a dream about a little girl, the boy confessed. She was trapped in a forest and I. Gay. What are you, a lolicon or something? Naruto feigned a cringe. Wow, Uzume murmured. And here I thought you were bad, bro. Naughty. Akatsu chorused, staring pointedly at Minato. No. The boy protested, rightfully ruffled by their accusations. That's not it at all. It was just a dream. Well, whatever it is, it doesn't make sense. Naruto raised his shoulder in a helpless shrug. Why would you be dreaming about a little girl? And here his eyes did turn to Musubi's sulking form in the yard. When you've got that. That's all woman, right there. How could you want a little chibi over that, huh? Oi, Uzume sniffed, miffed. I'm right here, baka. Ah, you know I love you. Naruto planted a peck on her cheek. You too, Akatsu. He was swift to reciprocate with his other Sekirei, earning a slight flush from his second mate. Ah. The ice user blinked. More, please. Everyone in the room bar Mia simultaneously sweat dropped at that. Ha. Naruto sighed blissfully. Goddamn, she's adorable. Era, a gentle voice chided. Whatever are you doing, Naruto-kun? The sage bristled as a ladle bopped him on the back of the head, preventing from delivering another kiss. Damn, Mia was sneaky. Vindictive, too. She just HAAAAAD to get the last hit in. Oi, it was just a peck. And how do I know you weren't going to take it further? A dark aura seemed to sizzle from her shoulders. You simply cannot be trusted with your beastly urges. Oh, you don't say. Just like that, the miniature Jubi was back again, leaning over his head. Why don't I show you some of my urges right now? Surely you're not implying violence. Akatsu whimpered and hid behind Uzume. Scary. Here we go again. The brunette groaned. These two just don't know when to quit. Back on the veranda, Minato had mercifully blacked out early and had been spared the more extreme pressure of being caught between Naruto's killing intent and Mia's battle presence. None of them noticed that their resident blonde had just swapped himself with a clone. None of them noticed that the original was planted firmly atop the roof. No one realized he was looking at his phone. And frowning. Later that evening. I'm going out, Mia. The Lavenderette turned toward the sound of that voice, a perfunctory farewell already on her lips as she heard Naruto's voice. She was no stranger to the blonde's evening strolls, and while she thought it reprehensible of him to leave his Sekirei so late in the evening, sighing, she turned to face him, even as his soundless footsteps descended the stairs. Do you want me to put dinner on? She paused, blinked at the sight of the Hishiate wrapped firmly around his forehead. There was a steely gleam in his eyes and stoic set to his jaw. No longer were they the gentle blue skies she'd grown to know and quite possibly love in spite of all his antics, for in their place stood a severe, swirling violet. Anyone else would have gibbered softly to themselves at the sight of those evil-looking orbs. But not Mia. She had seen done too much in her lifetime to be unnerved by a strange pair of eyes. Is something the matter? You could say that. I'm afraid I don't. Naruto did say anything more. He simply showed her his phone, the text within. Come to the southern bridge tonight, Naruto-kun. I have a special prize waiting for you. It would such a shame if you didn't make it. Manaka. Mia felt a muscle jump in her jaw, a cold knot of anger tightening deep in her stomach. Manaka. If there was one being whom she loathed more than anyone else in the world, with Karasuba being a close second, it was the eccentric CEO of MBI. He was responsible for the death of Takehito. And now someone who was equally precious, if not more, to her was about to go and meet that madman face to face. The thought sent a tiny chill of worry shooting down her spine. So you're going to go? Yeah. His voice had a rough edge to it, the keen tip of a sword about to be drawn. I've got a bad feeling about this. This close she could feel his power, so often held in check, straining at its leash. That worried her more than anything else. Naruto was usually very good at keeping his urges in check unless driven to the absolute limit. She'd sensed as much during his fight today. Usually, he would at least humor her during their occasional spar, but today, he'd been rougher than usual. There had been a severity to his fighting style that pounded her into the ground far more swiftly than usual. Suddenly it all made sense. Regardless of whatever Manaka had planned tonight, Naruto had plans of his own. He was going to cut loose, she realized. It could be a trap, you know. A smile. That's what I'm counting on. He hadn't sounded like that, hadn't looked like this since they'd first met. Since he'd first found his way to Maison Izumo. Once more the blonde was garbed in the signature orange and black attire, though admittedly some changes had been made since he'd worn them last. That sunset-colored jacket resembled more of a flowing cloak now embroidered with onyx flames, plaited pauldrons and vambraces strapped beneath the cloak and above his sleeves. Likewise, he had donned a pair of greaves and pollane over his newly tailored slacks and in place of his favored sandals, reminding her almost of a modern-day knight. No. A knight was always armored from head to toe. Naruto's armor was minimal, light, yet functional. This wasn't a knight. This was a shinobi. He looked every inch the warrior she remembered, and then some. But the changes didn't end there. There, strapped to his back, was a mighty blade, its features explipsed in wicked wrappings, a tiny skull sticking out of its hilt. Was it just her imagination, or did those bandages ripple under her gaze? Almost as if the sword were alive. But that wasn't possible. Even in this day and age, the idea of a living weapon was seen as little more than an idle fantasy to most. Not even MBI or Sekirei had access to such advanced technology. Still, this was Naruto-kun. Whatever that weapon was, she had to trust that he wouldn't use it for nefarious purposes after all. "Shall I set dinner out for you?" she asked quietly. They both knew the unspoken question. "Are you coming back?" Those rippling violet eyes regarded her for a long moment, his mouth pused in a thin line. He didn't know what to say, she realized. There was a very strong possibility he wouldn't be coming back. Why did that thought make her heart skip a beat? Yes, the blonde was often one of her more troublesome tenants, and yes, he did give her a bit more difficulty than most, but she liked to think that they understood one another. The idea of him simply walking out the door and not coming home was painful. "Hey," at length, he smiled, cupping her chin in hand. "I'm too stubborn to die, remember?" Those had been Takehito's last words to her. Why did she suddenly want to weep? When had he taken hold of her shoulders, she wondered. Why was he looking at her so? Bah-dump. What was going on? Mia struggled to bring her emotions back under control and found that she could not. Her face felt flush and her skin a tingle. She'd never felt like this before, not in all her years. Not even with Takehito. She didn't understand it. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, horribly wrong here, and his face was so close now, she could feel the warmth of his breath, his face. Naruto-kun. Mia. Oh dear. He was going to kiss her, wasn't he? She didn't think she could handle that. And yet, slowly, her eyes drifted shut as she mentally braced herself. Nothing happened. Instead, she felt warm lips press against her forehead. Mia blinked, too dazed to respond. Be sure and save me a plate. Naruto winked and pulled up his mask, obliterating the lower features of his face from view. Without another word, he turned and strode out the door. But not before Mia, as she was often wont, got the last word in. Take care, take care. Naruto fought to drive those very words from his mind as he strode out into the brisk night. What had that been back there? He'd come this close to kissing her. Mia, Uzume was one thing, but his relationship with the landlady had always been a shifting one from the start. They could be at one another's throats one moment, then thick as thieves the next. Cammy, the way she had looked at him back in the inn, it had made him shiver, and not in a bad way. It had taken every fiber of his being not to kiss her, and for a moment there, it looked as though she'd wanted him to. Mia, she couldn't be a Sekirei, could she? Nah, that just wasn't possible, or was it? You're overthinking things. Ashura prodded him. Maybe. Naruto kept walking, pulse pounding in his ears, threatening to deafen him completely. As much as he might dread the idea of playing to Monaka's whims, some small part of him was excited. Looking forward to this. By now he could sense that something was waiting for him. He wondered whether he should have told Uzume and Akatsu where he was going. No. If they knew, they'd only worry. He couldn't have that. In this case, ignorance was bliss. What they didn't know couldn't hurt him. So he kept walking, past the city limits, past the residential area, right out of Shinto Tito, marching to the bridge like it was nobody's business. Samahata stiffened in anticipation. It could taste the tension in the air, a potential feast waiting for it. Any of the 7 blades would have done, but he carried B's old blade with him tonight more out of camaraderie than anything else. It served as a reminder. He wasn't unstoppable, he could be beaten, just as his fellow Jinchuriki had been. Hold it, pal. 2 blurs descended from a nearby beam, flanking him on either side. Naruto craned his head over one shoulder, his emotion switching off at a glance. Sekirei. 2. Red, blue. Close combat types. Not a negotiation then. A trap. No, Monaka wasn't that foolish. A test. To see what he was capable of in a fight. Pointless. A vein pulsed in his forehead. He decided then and there that they would die. He didn't care if they were winged or not, if he was denying them the chance to find their ashikabi, or if they already had one. None of that mattered in this instant. Where's Monaka? Naruto asked. President. Not coming. The pale-haired Sekirei replied, brandishing her claws. You actually fell for that shit. The red one shook her head. Wow, you really are stupid. What was your name again? It's customary for youngsters to introduce themselves first. Young? Boy, you're not that much older than us. The look in those eyes said otherwise. I'm number 105 Benetsubasa. Remember it, because I'm the one who's gonna take you down. No, 104. Hi Hane. Pleased to meet you. Well, Naruto sniffed. It's nice to see that at least one of you has manners. So MBI's after me, huh? Naruto cocked his head aside, curious. And they sent 2 of their strongest dogs. Whatever for. That's none of your goddamn business. Benetsubasa snapped, grinding her knuckles together menacingly, producing a jerking popping sound. You may have killed those punks, but you're nothing without your Sekirei. So you'd better come quietly or... Whoosh! A sudden breeze tore through the bridge, blowing back the blonde's cloak. Benetsubasa had a fleeting glimpse of all the weapons arrayed beneath that garment before the wind died down. Some of them looked deadly, downright lethal even. Naruto grinned. He'd come here prepared for a fight, and by God he was going to give them one. You know, he began amicably, cutting her off before she could hope to continue her threat. There's a reason I decided to come alone. It wasn't out of pride or honor or anything, it wasn't even because I was curious about MBI's ultimatum. Raising a fist, he allowed the fingers of his hand to unfold. Odd. They seemed sharper than before, fingernails poking through the gloves. I don't want my girls to see me like this, they probably don't even know about this side of me, really. His eyes were horribly bright now, almost blinding to look out. Like what? What side? Stupid human. He wasn't making any sense. Naruto was suddenly in motion, his hands a blur as he moved to draw Samahata. Haihane. They rushed him but to no avail. The blonde was already moving, his body a blur of inhumane motion. Konoha Senpu. A heel slammed into her jaw, sending her skittering backwards just in time to see that massive blade slam down into her partner's crossed arms. Haihane grunted, buckling a bit beneath its weight, but she held her ground, buying Benny just enough time to leap back into the fray. She lunged at him and her fist found itself embedded in his sand. Indeed, a wave of grit and gravel rose from nowhere to intercept her, the grains not blocking the blow that would have been pointless with her strength, instead flinging them into her eyes, blinding her. Benetsubasa gave a snarl and scrubbed at her stung eyes with the back of her eyes, trying to clear them but to no avail. Somewhere in the black, she heard Haihane's shout. Claws of execution, Senpo, Jiden Rasengan, Sage Art, Magnet Release Spiraling Sphere. Benetsubasa barely had time to blink away the battering blindness before Naruto did something with a sphere in hand and sent Haihane sprawling. Despite blocking it successfully, her steel gauntlets were sent shattering like so much glass, her fragile hands clutching at her ribs in obvious pain. She gawped at him in disbelief. How did you? Naruto didn't answer, he simply opened his mouth and spat, slamming Haihane down with a wall of cutting wind. She did not rise again. He raised his gaze to the girders overhead and made a clenching motion with his fist, those eerie rimmed eyes flashing dangerously. Second later, they were shorn free. With a deafening shriek, the steel beams plummeted to the earth, pinning her ally in place. Despite herself, Benetsubasa felt a true touch of fear trail its icy fingers down her spine as Naruto turned, those eerie swirling eyes locking upon her with unerring accuracy. Haihane was down. Even if she wasn't deactivated, she wouldn't be helping her anytime soon. That left her alone with him. Next. Then he was upon her and Benny had no time to think for her friend, because she was fighting for her very life. Fast, she swore as his fist grazed her cheek, an unacceptable slip on her part. Then another as his knee brushed her heel. And then another as he took her counter in hand and swung her around, gracefully shoving her aside as though she were a rank amateur. Aura. She swung around to strike at him but he was suddenly gone again, whispering into existence behind her, his leg an electric blue blur. Impossible. No human should be this fast. But fast Naruto was, his heel exploding into her ribs with a deafening bang. Her body screamed as it took the brunt of his blow, even though she'd tensed up she could feel her muscles strain in pain. A blow like that would have shattered her ribs, had she been human. As it were, she could already feel her skin beginning to bruise. From a human's punch. Goddamn him. A small snarl tore over the red Sekure's features, her temper overtaking her. All right bastard, you asked for it. She lunged backwards, prepared to slam her fist into the concrete and send him plummeting into the waters below. Great coup. A flicker and he was gone, leaving her fist to pass through empty air. Arg. Stop mocking me. Rounding on the reappearing blonde, a hellish aura erupted around the red Seker's body and she charged, smashing into Naruto with a barrage of powerful kicks and punches. Back in the capital, a few civilians suddenly experienced a deep rumble, unable to properly perceive the grand battle raging only a few miles away. Naruto didn't even deign to smirk as he batted her blows aside. What's wrong? He chided, his voice warping over the insane motions blurring between them. I thought you were a little stronger than this. It was with a sinking feeling of dread that Benetsubasa realized she'd been played. This man was a good deal stronger than Manaka had let on. Oh well, she'd have to break him into little pieces then if he was proving to be difficult. The researchers had explicitly stated that they not injure him too much, but if this was to be her fate, she was going to come at him with everything she had. Blood festival. His hands were seemingly in 10 different places at once, an inhumane blur that took her to task. Enraged, she stepped back to strike him again, fist crackling with sparks. Naruto frowned, a familiar scene coming to mind. As that, Ashura shared his trepidation. Looks like it. Pulverizer. A series of scaly wings almost insectal in appearance erupted from the blonde's back and he was gone, soaring into the air before she could land the punch. Just like that he was airborne and out of her reach, hovering a few feet in the air with ease. Get back down here and fight me like a man. Benetispasa raged, stamping her foot in frustration. I'm not a man, I'm a shinobi. He called down merrily. That aside, I really ought to thank you for this. You've given me the chance to field test some of these new abilities I've been working on. So far I'm impressed with myself. He risked a glance back at the wings he'd grown, nodding appreciatively. Looks like Chomei's chakra's just as potent as ever. So, let's give Isobu a try. Almost exactly on cue his skin seemed to harden, a healthy tan complexion becoming matte gray in appearance. There we go. He smiled, the wings dissolving before her very eyes. Now,